Good afternoon. Welcome to the City of Farmers Branch study session. The date is December 15th, 2020. The time is 3 p.m. Mayor Dye will be with us a little bit later. He's coming in just for one special event, and I will be presiding over both the study session and the regular session tonight. So let's start with A1. Discuss regular agenda items. I'll start to my left, Ms. Ratana.
I'll wait for regular, if I mind.
You'll wait for regular? Okay. Mr. Baumgartner.
Yeah, just I have a question about I-6 related to parking. And, just for confirmation, it was hard for me in going through it to determine, it looks like there's 100 spots with 100 apartments with 2 cars, and another 21 garages with 1 car, which leaves 37 apartments and, 69 spaces. My question is just in relation to where those apartments are. We saw another development where the cars were parked far away, and I'm just wanted to identify where those 37 apartments without their own garage and where the parking spots are.
Okay.
Or
You have your
clarification.
presentation slides, you can share.
Thank you, Councilmember. So the apartment building, or building number 2, has 51 units, 1-bedroom units, and the parking for those are mostly, so originally when we looked at the concept plan on the zoning case, they had proposed about 31 spaces here, surface spaces here, in this first green rectangle. Now with this detailed site plan, the applicant is proposing to add more surface parking spaces along here, which are about 18 more spaces. Yeah, 18 more surface parking spaces, so that brings their total number to about 1:1 for each apartment unit. And additional guest parking will be available along Blue Lake Circle.
Where's that?
South on Blue Lake Circle.
Oh, so
yeah.
So the additional parking for those apartments would be all the way down.
So if you look
They'd have
at
to
these
walk
2
all the way through.
boxes, for 49 or the 51 units of 1-bedroom units on this apartment building, they have on here 11 plus 19, so about 30 spaces here, and additional 18 spaces here. So
Okay.
these 2 will be primarily dedicated to this apartment building.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Anything else?
No.
Does that answer what you need?
Yes.
Okay.
No, yeah, 18. And also, as Director Fargens pointed out, they have 11, because they changed that number, 11 garage spaces under this apartment building as well.
Okay. Thank you.
And the only additional thing I would add is that given all the discussion that we had at the city council meeting when we did the zoning, the applicant, and it was trying to be responsive to some of the comments that you had regarding the parking. So hence all of the new parking spaces that Shrupa pointed out just north of buildings 5, 6, and 7. So they were, even though they were meeting the minimum requirements, their plan was they were trying to be responsive to be able to add that additional parking.
Perfect. Thank you.
Going back to Ms. Ratana, who indicated she did have a comment.
I did. This one's related to J6, and I didn't see it, and so I did receive. I think some of us received correspondence related to some food trucks that were coming on. Is there a provision related to food? I know that because it's a venue, they have to abide by any rules related to food within the, much like we do as a city, within the establishment, make sure they get permits and whatnot. But things externally, like food trucks and those types of things, are they able to do that? Do they need to get a permit for that?
So I'm looking to see if Shane. So I was looking to see if Shane, oh, there you are. Thank you, my super friend on this. So he can address the permitting requirements. This proposed ordinance on the BYOB establishments does not address food truck being provided at the establishment. So keep in mind, this ordinance is solely focused on the regulating the consumption of the alcoholic beverages. Now, if business establishments want to have a food truck on site, from a zoning perspective, we have typically worked with the establishments and viewed that as more of an accessory. But if there's any permitting requirements in order to be able to have a food truck, then Shane can address that.
Okay. Could you address that? And how, and is timing an issue? Like, how late can they be there as well?
So our health does not, the health permit doesn't regulate how late they're there.
Okay.
We just regulate what's being sold and are they in compliance with the health aspect in terms of serving food or
Okay.
beverages out of the truck. Those are handled through temporary event permits typically. It depends if they're there every weekend, the same truck, then it may be a little different. But if it's a different truck every time, then each time it's a different permit for the truck coming in.
But they have to have one in order for them to have one on their establishment.
Yes, ma'am.
Got it. Thank you so much for the clarification.
And the other thing I would add is under the proposed ordinance, patrons are required to leave the premises by 2:30. So the alcoholic beverage service ceases at basically 2 a.m. They're given a 15-minute grace period to be able to finish any consumption, and then they have to be off the premises by 2:30. So the employees, if the employees are needing to do any additional activities or work at the establishment, that's still recognized and allowed under the proposed ordinance, but any patrons have to vacate the premises by 2:30. That includes the parking lot as well.
Are patrons allowed to bring alcohol out of the building into the parking lot if they were going to go get in the the food truck, or?
If memory serves me correctly, the ordinance prohibits the consumption out in the parking lot, but let me just verify and double check, make sure I don't misspeak. Right, so on page 7 of the ordinance, it's under section 46.89, parking area restrictions. So it restricts the permit holder, a manager employee of the BOB venue may not allow a person to consume alcoholic beverage in the parking area on the premises. So all the consumption has to occur inside the building, essentially.
And I'm assuming if there's a police officer on hand, which is a requirement, that they would police that.
Oh, I would believe so. So yes, there are requirements for a peace officer to be on location. So any additional enforcement by our officers, if they went by and observed that folks were on the property after 2:30, or even if someone was consuming alcoholic beverage in the parking lot prior to 2:30, we would be able to have the enforcement action under the ordinance.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynn?
So while we were talking about I-6, just want to point out that, even though there are 51 one-bedroom apartments going in here, it's not safe to assume that there's only going to be one resident in each one of those apartments. So it could potentially be 102 residents and as many as 102 cars. So I think based on what's going on in Building 2 and the addition of the spots to the north of Buildings 5, 6, and 7, I think you're still going to be short parking. Now, P&Z in their wisdom has already approved this and says that that's okay. I can see that there's going to be some problems.
Well, and so keep in mind, so this is a site plan. It complies with all of the requirements of the zoning. So right now, we're at a point of a ministerial function on the approval of a site plan. All of the discussion regarding the parking, we worked through that at the time we did the zoning. And so hence why the applicant was trying to be responsive since the time we've done the zoning and laid out the parking requirements for the development to add the additional parking. If multifamily developments end up not providing enough parking, then word gets around, especially in today's day and age, on social media and postings on Yelp, and that, this apartment complex is horrible and I can't find a place to park. If people read those reviews, then what's going to eventually translate is that the apartment leasing agent's not going to be able to lease their units. So it's going to be potentially problematic. We rely upon the developers to know their product and to ensure that they're providing adequate parking. We evaluate the parking at the time we did it with the zoning, and we believe that the parking requirements are sufficient for the proposed development. But you're right. I mean, could they potentially have 2 persons in every single unit where everybody has a car and driving? You could have that situation with any multifamily development within the community.
Well, I'd like them to explain that to everybody that's going to come and be disgruntled when they have to park to the south of Building 10 and walk to their residence in the rain.
Well, and
Residents in the rain.
And so, and keep in mind, they have other parking available in their Phase 1 development that is elsewhere. There's additional surface parking in Phase 1 that is available for the patrons. But if you would like to have this item removed from consent and the applicant available to address that, then we can make sure the applicant addresses how they anticipate their parking arrangements all working.
Just to clarify, I was just adding the numbers. I know it doesn't alleviate your concerns completely. So the 51 units, right now, they have 62 dedicated spaces for them, including 14 garage spaces within the building number 2, the 30 which are right next to the building along the Spine Road surface parking, and the 18 additional that they have added with the site plan. So for 51, they have right now dedicated 62 parking spaces, but I understand where your concern is, and as Director Fergens mentioned, that a developer will be available.
Well, 62 still doesn't even put you at like 50% if half those units have two residents in them and 2 vehicles. I mean, I think we're headed for a problem, or we're not, but the developer is, and obviously he must feel very comfortable in his product that he doesn't have to offer enough parking for his residents. So I'm just bringing that up because to me it's pretty glaring that that's a problem waiting to happen.
Terry, does this rise to the level that you would vote against the consent agenda? So if you are, then I'm going to need to pull it off so we can have a roll call on that and have more discussion.
Well, I don't know if any other council has issues with this or sees a potential for problem.
Well, I felt like it complied with our latest parking revision, where there's other methods of parking, including talking to adjacent building owners, which we know there are vacant in the evenings, but maybe not during the day, and off-site parking. So I think, for me, that addresses that. Does anyone else, does this rise to the level that you would like to pull it off and have the discussion with the developer?
Not for me. I think it becomes a marketing challenge for the developer, right? He may, he's going to be the one that's going to have to, at the end of the day, he's going to have to make the people who are renting from him happy or they're going to leave.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, if they're satisfied with the parking, it meets our regulations, and, it will cost in the long run not having enough parking. If it is an issue and becomes an issue, it will just cost them financially.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that for me, that one of the biggest things when we discussed this during the last meeting was making sure that we have that 1-to-1 ratio at least, to where every apartment's able to have at least 1 vehicle at the very least. But I do think it's going to be a marketing issue, and it's going to be a consumer issue, to where they're going to have to do their due diligence too, to figure out, to ask those questions, and which usually they do, because if they know it's 2 people and they're going to probably have the same scenario. So I think that'll take care of itself. And it may be a marketing issue, and it may come across in the next 6 months after they open that it's an issue, and then. But I think that for me, it was more so making sure that they at least had 1 vehicle that they're able to park for this particular development. So, and they do meet, like you said, they do meet the needs. So I don't have any reservations in voting or against this item. So.
Mr. Driscoll, do you have any comments to add on this item only?
I'm sorry, didn't hear the last part.
To add on this item only.
I don't really have any to add. As has been stated, it does meet our requirements, and if the developer, this is his plan, I would think he's thought thought through the parking issues, and so I would not be in favor of pulling it off the agenda.
Okay, Terry?
So, you know,
I'm happy to pull it off if you feel strongly and you want to vote again, or you think you would be
well,
against.
when I read this, I wasn't sure, and then just hearing the explanation again, it still leads me to not be sure, because what's going to happen, or what a possible outcome might be, is that this does become a marketing issue for the complex, and they're going to say, well, we did what the city said we could do. But blame falls back on the city. Two, if they can't get the kind of tenant in there that they're expecting, then they're not going to get the kind of rents that they're trying to command for that area, because they don't have the full amenities to offer their residents. Thus, you're going to start to see a decline in the particular development. I'm just going on record as saying it. If my fellow council members feel that this is worth moving forward with, and that this is not an issue, then I'm fine. We'll leave it on there, and because I don't know that I'm going to do anything to change your mind, and I don't know that the developer will do anything to change our mind either. He can't create space unless he doesn't build something, and if he doesn't build something, then that means everything else is going to cost more, because he won't have the density. So,
I understand. Your concerns are noted.
all right. So I wanted to speak or ask a question about I-4. And with respect to that item, the jetter truck, since we are already outsourcing street sweeping to some extent, can that not be outsourced also?
So, good evening. Tom Higgs, Fleet Operations Manager. Currently, this is just for the replacement of the jetter truck. I don't know that there's a contract or a service for outsourcing that service.
Do we need to buy a new truck if there's an opportunity to outsource, and then we're not using the existing equipment so much?
That would be something that the department may answer. I don't have an answer for whether we're subbing that out or not.
Okay.
Hold on, Mr. Bentley, you have a comment about that?
Mark Bentley, Director of Public Works. That is a piece of equipment that we use constantly.
Okay.
And that is not something really that we could outsource, because then we have to have time to wait for somebody to come. And generally speaking, when we need it right then. So this is a piece of equipment that is needed constantly.
Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to know. And with respect to I-10 and I-11, my only question on that is, are the improvements that these people are making to their property going to be reflective in the assessed property values?
Back to I-10, that's a repair of a wall in the creek. I don't think that's going to add value to the property, but it will if the wall should fail. So
Okay.
this is keeping the wall from failing.
But 9
That-
is a grant.
So I-11, the Terra Place, is landscaping, and DCAD rarely assesses incremental value for landscaping, so probably more likely not.
Okay.
So let me just comment on this, the order here. I-9, we're amending the neighborhood partnership to include the walls. And then I-10 is a wall improvement. And then I-11 is and landscaping improvements, as you noted, for Terra Place. Now, I would like us to have a little bit of discussion about I-11, because there were two proposals. There was an A and a B. A was just the front, and B included at the rear entrance
Correct.
also. But at the rear entrance, it's more internal to the property. So I wanted to we either need to have discussion now and decide which one we're going to go with, or I need to pull it off consent so that we can make the resolution separate if you want to have discussion later. So I'll just throw that open to comment, Mr. Lynn.
So, yes, I think we should pull it off for now so we can decide what what makes best sense if we're going to move forward with that. But, so I'll answer that question.
Okay.
But-
So does anybody else have a strong feeling of that they know what they should do at this point? All right, we'll talk. And I think, is the resident that requested it going to be here for that part of the meeting?
Yes, I do have a presentation, so it's easy for me to
Great.
pull up and
Okay, so
walk
we
you
will
through the two
pull
options.
I-11 off the consent, and that we will put that in at appropriate time. I don't know if I want to make it J8 or make it J1.
Do you have to make a motion? Do we have to make a motion for that at the beginning of the regular meeting to pull it off, or can we do it right now? I'm not sure. I
We'll
just wanted
pull it off.
clarification.
The procedure will be when somebody moves to approve the consent agenda with the deletion of I-11.
Yeah, so it will be during the, okay, just making sure. Thanks.
Mr. Lynn, anything else?
Nope.
Thank you very much. Mr. Driscoll?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. So I did have a few questions. They're very minor, I think, but on J4, Mr. Bentley, when I read through that a couple times, and I did not see how many manholes that covers, or if it's just a scope of work and we do manholes until we run out of money.
That's correct. We just do as many as we can with that amount of money.
With that, okay. And so you feel like that's an appropriate amount for the
Yeah,
annual requirement that we have?
We have 57% of our manholes are brick manholes in the city, and we're trying to get all of them as we can. And we've only been applying them $100,000 to $150,000 a year, and that just hasn't been getting enough manholes, so we're doubling that.
Great.
And moving forward.
Great. You might as well stay here because I got a couple more. So
Okay, all right.
on the boxes for this is I-5, for we're replacing the streetlights. And first of all, I'll comment and say that I appreciate the work that your department's doing to replace these boxes. The one that you installed at Valley View and Josie has made a huge improvement in the traffic. My question was, is this the best box we can get? Is it have the capability we need for future expansion, or are we just buying the ones that do the left-hand turn signals?
No, we actually, every time we upgrade to whatever the standard is at that time. Of course, as time goes on, standards change and the boxes will change, so we can't anticipate what will happen in the future. But the boxes we buy today will accommodate anything we need to do at this time.
Okay, and you have enough boxes here for the scope of work that you have planned for this year?
It's our typical 6 boxes that we buy every year. And so basically we'll probably switch out 5 and always keep one on the shelf in case there's an accident and it knocks a box off and we have to replace it.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
And I had a question, just a point of interest on I-7 and I-8, Ms. Cook. Are these spec houses or are there resident owners that are,
I believe one's spec and one has a resident.
do you know which one is the resident?
I believe it's Mount View.
Mount View, okay, thank you.
Yes.
And I think that's all I had. So with that, we will go to A2. Mike, go ahead. He had nothing. No. I2, receive an update on the text dot 22-acre site along LBJ Freeway. And I'll preface this by saying that I had asked for this to be placed on the agenda, understanding that TxDOT has changed their plans. We were looking to have that property sold, and now that they're planning to retain it, I think it brings into question our process or our plans for Maybrook and that whole property and what we need to do to maintain that over time. So I've asked Allison and whomever else she brings along
Yes.
to give us a full briefing on that. And I also invited several residents to come because they have concerns specifically about Maybrook. So I'd like some discussion about that.
Okay, I talked about the real estate point, and I know Mr. Bentley can talk about Maybrook, and Hugh Pender is here to talk about any of the maintenance and whatnot for the area. So the state of Texas has owned the site for many, many years, and they have informed us that they are going to keep the site for staging, for construction purposes, for it's either the I-35 project or the extension of 635 as you go east for a few years. and then offload it for sale. So they had it for sale for a while, and they did not have any buyers. It is now not for sale at all and won't be for sale until they deem necessary. So that is the real estate update, and that's all we have.
Okay. Over time, the weeds and grass and trash on that site has been a continuing issue.
Yep.
Give me your thoughts on how we get TxDOT to better maintain the property, or do we need to maintain it ourselves but we've only been doing that periodically? I'd like to see us have a more concerted push to maintain that property in some kind of order.
Yes, I understand. We've been somewhat disappointed in the lack of maintenance, but I know Hugh's team has stepped in the past, and so I will let him speak about what has occurred as far as the maintenance goes.
Good afternoon, Hugh Pender, Director of Community Services. I think the state basically tells us that they will maintain that property twice a year, which is usually spring and probably late summer, early fall. And I think you know very well that that's not near enough. What typically happens is we step in, and I say we, it's usually the Parks Department since they have a mowing contractor. I think it's several $1,000s to do that each time, so obviously we don't do it to keep it maintained like some of our parks, but we do it to try to keep the stuff down. I think we have reached out with very little success to TxDOT to gain some ability to maybe herbicide or kill the grass and weeds, but that's essentially kind of where we're at today.
Mm-hmm. So we have no recurring contract in place?
No. So I think Mike has a mowing contract, commercial mowing contract that he mows other properties with, but this one, you know, he can add that as needed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about the weeds and the brush that are along the east side of Maybrook, the top side? You know, I guess you're heading north, actually, north side of
yeah,
Maybrook.
kind of abutting
along the drainage.
Yeah, abutting the residential.
Yeah, whose responsibility is that to maintain? Because that has become overgrown and.
So let me see if I can use, so looking up, if you can follow the cursor, sorry, apologize. I think this remnant property, so all of this, if you guys recall, was a two-story office building before. So typically, we've run into some graffiti issues, I think this late last week or maybe the week prior to that on this wall. And so in discussing that, typically the masonry wall is put up from the commercial site to buffer from the residential site. So I feel pretty comfortable that all of that probably is near the property line, and up to the property line is indeed TxDOT's. And I believe that remnant piece that sort of falls across that drainage channel is theirs as well. I think they forget about that when they maintain it because it's back across the road. And I think they feel like anything on the other side of the road is ours, but I don't believe that's the case. I think we own the channel, but not south of the channel.
Right.
And so we've engaged with the contractor to have that graffiti removed because we feel like TxDOT will not do it in a timely manner.
Right.
But I don't believe anybody's maintaining the shrubs or I think there is some brush like you talked about maybe along here.
Yeah, brush and shrubs that are overgrown and that kind of thing. I'm concerned about a couple of things as being a place for people to hide back there, and you know, we don't know what's going on, and we can't, their visibility is not.
Yeah, you're right. There's some vegetation, some trees and growth in this area here where I think that's been an encampment in times past. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, exactly.
Okay. I guess I will just comment, and I'm going to turn it open to other comments in a second, but I think we need a longer-term solution for this. I think that I would ask that city manager to take a look at how we maintain this on a more recurring basis, or how we get TxDOT to do it with more than twice a year, because it's just not enough, and it's it's a constant eyesore. It is one of the main entrances to our city, and not only the grass and weeds, but the trash that piles up on there is just out of control.
Agreed. We've tried to put pressure on TxDOT to no avail, and we've met with our state senator, our previous state senator, to try to enact some pressure that direction as well. And we kind of just landed on the fact that if we want it mowed, we're going to have to do it ourselves. Our team goes out and takes care of that. We put a lien on the property. Once the property eventually sells, to someone in the private sector, we will get paid back for that. So we can come up with something perhaps more proactive than what's been going on before.
Good, thank you. I'd like to talk about Maybrook. So it always been the plan that the road gets sold with the property, and now that the property is not going to be sold for another 5 years, so we've kind of preemptively closed the road to public traffic because it's started to deteriorate over time. I'd like to talk about, shouldn't we go ahead and improve that road, since that we don't know how long TxDOT's going to be on there and if it is ever going to sell. And so I have a couple of points. One is I have several residents who contacted me about using the road. It gets used quite frequently. I'd like to hear from the fire department about access to Dallas Medical Center from Josie, and how we could possibly put that back into our program to get the potholes repaired and the road put back into service.
Well, we've gone back and forth on this. Of course, when TxDOT had the property, when they were building 630, rebuilding 635, there was discussions at that time that they would repair that road at their cost, which their cost was about $1.5 million. It didn't happen because there was some discussion that we felt like as a city that it was supposed to be completely on them, but they were going to do some at their cost, but we would have to pay the $1.5 million. To actually repair that road, you're probably looking at $2.5 million. Is it worth $2.5 million to repair that road? In my opinion, we have better places to spend those funds for as much traffic as that road would get. That's up to the council in reality. I mean, if you want us to go in there and repair that road, we will do that. Now, I think it's gone beyond just patching. It needs to be rebuilt. If you're going to do anything, I mean, patching is just, it's not going to help it. I mean, that's the problem with it right now. It's been patched so many times that you just really can't patch it anymore. So my suggestion would be to put permanent bollards on each end and close it permanently, because I think it's just going to become a maintenance issue for the city for the long haul, or we're going to have to spend a lot of money that we really could be spending on other city streets that really need repair.
Yeah. What about access? If you put permanent bollards there, I guess they would be removable, like they would do on our alleys?
Yes, they would be chained down so we could remove them to get in there if we need to do anything. But in most cases, anybody else could not remove those. It'd only be for city staff to remove. The access is just a loop around 635 and back out to the other side. We've already taken bus traffic off of that. They now make that little jog. There's not much more you can do. It's really not for the city to continue maintenance on that street or maintain ownership of that street. It's really not feasible. I think it's better use is to go with the property and let it be utilized by whoever owns that property, as however they want to see fit to use it. Now, with suggestion on the weeds and the shrubs and stuff on there, I just go in there and cut them all down. Take them all the way down to the ground, get rid of them. It's still our right of way. So we can go in there, or Parks or us, whoever, just go in there and just take them all the way down to the ground. That would eliminate a lot of that hiding space. But there still is that little triangle piece on the other side that is part of the ownership of the TxDOT property, which is not, that's their property, it's not ours. So, but, that would be my suggestion.
Okay, thanks. Chief Vargas, can I hear from you that you don't need that to get to Dallas Medical Center? Your
Gabriel Fire
ambulances are
Chief.
fine?
No, we don't use it for the same reason what he said. It's rough road, so it's not good for the ambulance or the patient. So we don't
Okay,
use
thank you. I'll turn it open to anybody else. Anybody else have any comments on the road or the properties?
I would agree with Mr. Bentley related to the cost, especially because we don't know what that's going to be. Obviously in the past, when it comes to new development, we've tried to kind of see if we can work with the new developer and paying for some of that. And so I think we can use that those funds for other projects within our city. I did have one question, and maybe for Hugh, but I would like to know kind of what our maintenance cost would be or is, has been over the past, year or two as it relates to the maintenance of that. And that would really give us some leverage or just more information on what options we would have, on how much it costs in order that whatever option that we do have, it's the more cost-effective and conservative option that we can get. But I do agree as well with just closing that off, because if it's not used for emergencies, if it's really not being used for anything else, I would see the case for that if there was no other way from getting from one side to the other. But the frontage road is so close to that people could still use that to get from one side to the other if they need to in a more orderly and speedy fashion. So I would agree with you in just closing that off and only making it accessible to us if we need to access some portion of that property. So those are just my thoughts. But again, I do want to make sure that I have no interest in refurbishing that road, because to your point, it's more than patches, and 2.5 million is just too much. And I think that could be used for other projects that we've had to stall due to our budget for next year. So.
Okay. Anybody else? Terry?
Thank you.
Did you want me to answer your questions to the costs?
Sorry, yes, sir. I didn't know if you had them. But
I don't,
Okay.
but I can get that. 'Cause
Well, then.
I've been with the city for 6 years, and over that time, it's been, when I first came on, TxDOT was operating. So we didn't do any maintenance in there because
Gotcha.
they were in there operating. And ever since they left, we've done very minor. So we
Okay.
really haven't kept up with the cost on
Gotcha.
that. But I can get numbers if you want those from prior to.
yeah,
that
or I guess
time.
how much to your point, how much it would cost, right? Because that would give us an idea to say, okay, is it maybe better to enclose that somehow with a more aesthetic, type of option where it's screened and we can at least add some type of city logos on there to just make it more amenable, because it is the frontage of our city, and it just looks so bad when you're going into Webb Chapel or Josie. So I know in other sites that take years, they have, the screen fencing where they're able to put logos of the development or something like that, where at least we can access it to go in to make, some type of repairs, but at least it's more aesthetically pleasing, especially if it's gonna be 5 years or more based on whatever those expansions look like from a TxDOT perspective.
Right,
So,
and then once
yeah.
they start moving in on it again, you're going to be right back where we
Exactly.
were a few years ago, so.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pender?
Just add real quick, from a mowing perspective, about $3,000 each time you do it. And that doesn't include any of the shrub trimming or clearing, of the brush along the backside, just literally the cutting of the grass.
And how many times do we do that, or would we do that, you think?
We've probably done it about twice a year, so
Okay.
they're doing it twice, we're sort of doing it twice on a complaint basis, but if you want it done more frequently, that's
Sure.
roughly the cost.
Minimum about 6,000 from our side. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mr. Mashburn?
Sorry, if I may, I might have a little more information. Mike Mashburn, Director of Parks and Recreation. So it's $3,000 a year every time we do that, because it gets so bad and the trash gums up mowers, and that has to account for repairs for our contractors. So if it's regularly maintained, the price may come down. I can look into that, be happy to do so. And we can have our litter crew remove trash as well, just so it's a little bit better, because it does look awful. So we'll get those numbers and we'll get back to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Lynn?
So this is a piece of property that, yes, it is at our front doorstep. It is disgusting looking. And unfortunately, we weren't able to affect anything when the property was available to us. And now the property is looking to be tied up for another 5 to 8 years at a minimum, from what I was told. I just happened to have a meeting last week with a real estate company that represents a major retailer who is interested in the property, even looking forward. So they know that they're going to have to wait. They like the spot. I don't think anybody in the city would have an issue with what would be planned to go in there. They asked me, does the road come with it? And I said, as far as I know, yes. And if they wanted to take that road out and use it as an alley or something, or a delivery way for whatever they're going to do, I don't think they would have an objection from the city council. So I wanted to make sure I conveyed that point. The property has been overgrown, as we all know, and we really have to complain hard to get it attended to. part of the problem is not only the high brush, but also the trees with low canopies. And as Mr. Bentley alluded to, you could take down all the trees, which I hate to do. How about just raising those canopies so the homeless that have been trying to hide out there can't hide out there? This is especially bad over in the area behind the 7-Eleven. And Asim Salahi, the owner of that 7-Eleven, has been complaining because there are homeless who live in this little grove of trees and come over and they've broken his cover box for the water, and they'll actually bathe right outside his store. Another thing is the illegal dumping that has been taking place on that little triangle on the north side of the property. And I've had neighbors complain about that. I've notified appropriate city departments multiple times about illegal dumping that has taken place over there. So I do not support reopening that road. I don't support putting any money into it at this time. Anything that's going to be done, let TxDOT do it. They can use it as they see fit, and then at such time that they're ready to vacate the property, then we can hopefully still work with some interested parties there. One thing I would like to see is that we go back and amend what the allowed uses are or are not, because I did not see storage, self-storage or storage facility on there. And that property is too valuable to end up being a public storage or some other type of mini storage warehouse on all that space. And so I would like to see that added to the list, or maybe it doesn't need to be added to the list because it's not on the allowed uses. I don't know, but I was concerned about that when I read this, because that's my great fear, is that we're going to get something in there that just totally devalues this piece of prime real estate.
So the zoning is specific in terms of what uses are allowed. There is a prohibited uses list also included within there, but if a zoning does not allow for the uses, they're still prohibited even though they don't show up on the prohibited use list, because zoning tells you what you can do with your property and how you can use it. So if it does not allow for self-storage, which it currently does not, then someone could not come in and do a self-storage development. And my apologies, I should have identified myself. Tina Fergans, Planning Director. I know you all know who I am, but so.
Michael.
Yes, just a couple of points. I concur with some of the statements that have been made by a couple of my colleagues here. And as Mr. Bentley suggested, I would be in favor of closing that with removable ballards until we have better idea what TxDOT has planned there. And the road is in horrible shape, and I'm glad to hear we haven't been spending money on maintaining the road. And as Mr. Bentley also suggested, I'd be in favor of just clearing that as much as we can so we don't have ongoing issues with garbage and trash and then vagrants and continuing maintenance and mowing costs on the city. And as Mr. Land said, if we haven't, we should attach a lien to that, and when it's sold, we would be then reimbursed for our expenses on our mowing and maintenance of that property.
Okay, anybody else? Mike, you got anything? All right, I'm not going to belabor this too much. I think I'm probably in the minority of wanting to see the road reopened, and so I guess let me just sum up then. We want to proceed with the bollards. We want to get some kind of recurring maintenance on the property to include trash and brush. We'd like to see all those high shrubs and trees along the retaining wall there, the barrier wall cut down. And then, as Mr. Lynn suggested, perhaps we can get the trees trimmed up to eliminate. The ones that are on the main part. Yeah, right. And we'll lean TxDOT for everything that's done. Now, my only question that remains is that doesn't the city own the road?
Yes, sir. There's There's a 60-foot right-of-way through there, which the channel is in that 60 feet. So the road is within a 40-foot section of it, and the channel is within a 20-foot section of it. So everything along that north side is ours, 20 feet from the road. So anything, we can go in there and remove all the shrubs and anything out of that barrier on the north side of the road. But going on private property to trim trees will require rights of entry and everything else, because it is private property.
Right. And Ms. Cook, you think you can get those for us? Rights of entry?
I will certainly try. I've got it once before, but we'll see. But that is necessary because we don't have jurisdiction to go on the property and trim the trees.
Okay, well, let's see if we can get that and get that done. And then, Crystal, could you reiterate the type of fencing that you're looking for?
Yeah, it really is just exploring what options we have. Obviously, if we're limited to accessibility by TxDOT, that would be limited. But I've just seen certain developments that have taken a really long time. In order to be more aesthetically pleasing, they add screened fencing around the property, and then they add even logos of either the city or the developer, or some verbiage, city in a park, those types of things would be the example. And it's usually like green, so it kind of resembles greenery, and that way it's just more aesthetically pleasing, and it's gated with a lock, and only TxDOT and our staff would have access to it. And then that way it would deter our homeless population to be able, our homeless neighbors to be able to get in there. Obviously, we'd still want to do some type of maintenance within if we need to, but that way in case it doesn't get done and we decide to only let TxDOT do it, we wouldn't be able to see it with the naked eye. So that's just, again, just trying to explore other options and that's why I wanted to know how much it costs, because maybe it'd be more cost effective to just purchase that, especially if we know it's going to be over the next 5 to 10 years based on the projects.
Right, because that would eliminate the maintenance we'd have to do.
Yes, sir.
Exactly, good point. So, Mr. Land, could you kind of take that on to evaluate the costs and the fencing? Good. So I'm still, I'm sorry to drag this out. Don't we need to abandon the road then? If it was, if we thought that TxDOT would magically come along and repair the road, once they, to whomever they sold the road to.
Yes, I would say we do that at that time, whenever that property develops. At that time, it's probably easier to abandon it than now. I think we would still want to retain at this time, because then we still have control. We can still get in there and do things we need to do. If we want to clean up, we've got an access way.
Right.
Okay, but when it comes to time to develop it, then at that time, that's when we would go in and abandon that right away to whoever bought the property.
Understand. Thank you. Yeah, I know there's a few residents that were listening in or concerned about this. If you would like to comment, we're not going to do that now, but there will be time during citizen comments at the beginning of the 6 p.m. regular city council meeting. If you would like to sign up for that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you have to say. So we'll close that one out, go to A3. Discuss city liaison appointments to community boards. Who's leading this? Am I leading this, Amy, or is it? All right, so every year with an election, we relook our list of city council liaisons, and I noted there's a few that Councilmember Blackson was on, and but it's a good opportunity if anybody feels strongly about one that they no longer want to be on, or that they would like to be considered to be on, then we can talk about that now. So does anybody have any things that they're doing that they no longer wish to continue? Hearing none, then I guess Councilmember Driscoll, would you like to just fall in on everything that Councilmember Blackson had? He had the Sister City program. He was the alternate on the Texas Municipal League, and I think that was it. Was he on travel expense also? Okay. I don't know why anybody would want to be on that, but. Are you okay with that, Michael? Sister City, I think you would be great on.
Yes, I would definitely like to do the Sister City. I'd worked on that committee the last couple of years, and if we hadn't had the pandemic, we would have been on the trip to Germany, to Garbsen and Schönebeck in
Right.
June. And I would definitely like to do that. And also on the Texas Municipal League, that's fine.
Okay, and you want to do review travel expenses also?
How often does that one meet?
It's very rare, very rarely.
Oh, okay, that's fine, yes.
Okay. Then I think we have successfully handed out the assignments. So with that, we'll go on to A4. Receive the fiscal year 2019 to 2020 fourth quarter financial update. Ms. Evans-Jones.
So many to choose from. I think this is it. Okay. Hello, hello. I'm
Hello.
Sherelle Evans-Jones, Director of Finance. Happy to be with you tonight. We're presenting our fourth quarter update, and this particular update starts with a disclaimer because this represents unaudited financial information. Our audit is currently ongoing. We anticipate being able to come back before council as we have in past years and present our audited financial statements, which we refer to as our CAFR, within the next 12 weeks. So what you have before you doesn't represent many of those topside closing entries and a lot of things that happen in the process of making the preliminary financial results into that big old CAFR document. So I wanted to make sure that I explained that. Another thing that's would be of interest is this year in particular, we will be getting an additional separate audit that's referred to as a single audit. It happens when you have federal funds that exceed a certain threshold, and we have exceeded that threshold largely because of the $2.6 million that we received in funding through the CARES program. So you should also expect that those federal funds and other funds that we receive through those channels to be subject to an additional and a separate audit as well. Now, I will show you this, and the first thing that I will say is that this item looks a little bit different than what you had in your packet, and I did that intentionally because I was trying to lay out a lot of the same information that you have in your packet in a one-page format just to kind of be more concise with your time. So you see revenue and expenses here, you see current year, you see prior year. It's a lot of good information on general fund here. I'm gonna change the view. Hopefully you all can see this because the way my eyes are set up is it can be kind of tricky to read that. So I put this little thing right here so we can highlight what we're talking about. Okay. So let's start with the discussion about property taxes. So in terms of geography and what's all going on with the way everything is laid out, this is our adjusted budget comparing to actuals. And for me, I'm looking at how close or over or under we came to hitting that 100% because we're at a full year, and looking at last year's full year actuals and comparing those and how well or how much better or worse we did from a revenue and expense perspective there. So having said that, our property tax is an area where we're a hair behind budget, about $1 million, or we're at 96 or 97% of budget. This is one of those that we talked about in the packet, and we have evaluated throughout the year where we fully anticipate that these items will be realized. A lot of times they go into collections and other methods that we have to be able to collect on any property taxes that we have outstanding. I'll compare current year to prior year, and just point out that that large percentage increase is largely due to the valuation change from last year to this year, because if you recall, our property tax rate for the 2 years in question remained the same. Okay, sales and use tax. This is a interesting and good story. Despite everything that you may remember us having this time together where we talked about and considered the budget and what's going to happen with the pandemic, and one of those numbers that we had, a bit of consternation about was what was going to happen with sales and use tax. That number has largely performed according to budget and has exceeded our last year, full year, pre-pandemic number. That, you may recall, is largely because we had such a strong trajectory for the first 6 months of revenue that we had received in this area, and we were braced for what's going to happen post-pandemic, et cetera, and we just really didn't see the settling of that revenue as we dealt with coronavirus. So that much we are thankful for. In terms of franchise fees, this area is performing slightly behind budget, about $300,000, and the reason for that is a change in legislation that has happened. That change in legislation allows for a provider that provides both phone and cable service to pay one set of franchise fees. So we're seeing that a little bit in those numbers, and we anticipate we may continue to see that. This is an area where we will adjust our calculations as we come up with our new budget, but one of those where they have been successful in prevailing in that particular area. I'm going to jump down to licensing and permits. This area is performing ahead of budget because of, largely because of the development area, the development that's happening on our west side. But if you take a look at it, current year compared to prior year, you see some decline. This is one of those areas where we always anticipated, as we have development that is happening with the west side, that we would expect some settling as we begin to, we wouldn't have as explosive of revenue, and it would begin to settle, and you can kind of see that starting to happen in the numbers. Charges for services is an area where we are performing ahead of budget due to, this is one of those areas where you have 2 or 3 different kinds of things flowing through there. Charges for services is increasing because of larger tonnage going into, in terms of the revenue that we receive related to the landfill, and increased emergency services activity is another area where we're seeing increased revenue there. Mm-hmm. Fines, forfeits, and assessments is an area performing materially on budget, I would say, really close to meeting that budget. But if you compare this number to our prior year number, you can kind of see some of the toll that the pandemic has had. That's where a lot of that court revenue, a lot of that library revenue, et cetera, is flowing through there. So you can kind of see a little bit of the toll there. You may recall that we had plans for certain areas to do that we were evaluating because of the pandemic, and some areas we thought were going to be relatively stable, and this is one of those areas that we were evaluating, and we can kind of see the settling of that number as we anticipated. In terms of general government, so I'm going to move down to expenditures. So this is an area, let me get my little highlighter together. So this is an area where when we first began to face, what you'll see in all of the expenditures, or a great many of the expenditures, the story is that we curbed our spending. So when, 6 months into the year, when we knew we were facing what we were facing, we curbed, we physically moved or adjusted within our budget a lot of the funding and moved that into an area of safekeeping. And once we kind of had a better idea of what direction we were headed, and if we were going to see the revenue decline that we anticipated, we began to release the valve, so to speak, in terms of some of those expenditures. So the area of general government is where we moved a lot of the budget. This is the area where we tend to keep a lot of that money that got moved over from general fund. Public Works encompasses a couple of things, and that budget is largely has some savings due to personnel savings, timing in terms of when personnel were hired, and savings on reduced repairs and maintenance cost. That area also includes sustainability, so there's two departments flowing through there, and that sustainability and public health was performing behind budget as well due to position vacancies and restructuring, et cetera, so savings from personnel cost. And it is expected to be the host fee, et cetera, in terms of the tonnage was one of those areas that also is flowing through there in terms of expenditures. Moving forward, public safety, and we had some savings from our police area, position vacancies, holding on hiring, et cetera. In all of these areas, once we were able to ascertain where we are with our revenue, we assumed and resumed all of our hiring as anticipated. And lastly, our culture and recreation area had some reductions in expenditures and savings in expenditures, just simply because of an across-the-board cut and reduction in response to pandemic. We talked about a lot of the revenues that we anticipated were going to be user fees related to some of the parks and recreation functions, so we specifically worked within that area to see what we could do to curb expenditures. So overall, we are performing in a net income position, which is positive, and I just kind of broke down some of the details related to those areas. Are there questions before I move forward to a different fund? Okay.
I have one question.
Yes.
What's the net impact from when we were planning the budget back in September, August, September, on our rainy day fund? Has this boosted it a little bit, or?
Well, yes, you can. So you can see that overall, anything that we have where we have net revenue, that is going to help the general fund balance. That's what the term that I use to refer to it.
Yeah.
So this is one that it does help that fund balance.
Yeah, but there's also transfers that are expenditures that come out. Is that, I mean,
This would be reflective of those transfers, et cetera. The transfers are moving funds into, either moving funds into a different fund or receiving transfers from a different fund, but the expenditures have all been recorded or are listed as purchase orders or encumbrances, and they're captured in the actuals.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Question. So, Sherelle,
Yes.
seeing how we're about $1.1 million behind on property tax collections, okay? Looking ahead, do you think that that number, I'll ask the question a different way. Do you think that we're looking at an increase in property tax delinquencies or the lack of property tax collections for 2021 due to the pandemic?
I think that what we need to be watching and evaluating is the valuation that happens in this upcoming tax year. You may recall my explanation, and when our representative came from DCAT and they explained that January 1st, 2020 was the date that all of these properties for this particular budget year that we're living in were evaluated. So the budget that we just went through the process and completed and the budget that we're living within is based on something that happened before the pandemic. January 1st, 2021 is going to be the basis for when we do the valuation for this upcoming budget year. So that is one that we're definitely watching and evaluating and just kind of seeing exactly where we stand from a valuation perspective. One thing that I think may serve us well, this is something that communities are going through all across because everybody's dealing with this pandemic and its impact on lots of services and revenue, et cetera. One thing that I think may serve us well is the fact that we are more weighted towards commercial real estate as opposed to residential. The reason I think that may be helpful to us is because a good bit of that commercial real estate is tied down, its valuation is based on income. And they have underlying leases that even though everybody's been working from home and everybody's getting, some sort of an idea, hey, maybe we don't need this office space, but there's that lease that ties you down for, a period of time that may make it financially not advantageous for our commercial properties to attempt to vacate that. So I think that helps us a little bit better in our community than maybe other areas that might not be as weighted in that area.
I would agree with you on that, but I'll also say, because I've heard from a number of folks that weren't working, I'll say the business of being a city still goes on. We still have our own bills and responsibilities. And so folks who were severely impacted by the pandemic, who were struggling just to put food on the table, are already expressing concern that they may not be able to pay their property tax or pay it on time. And so now, if you don't pay it by January 31st, then you're looking at whatever it is, 5% extra every month, So who knows if we're going to see a snowball number, but I at least I hope that everybody on council and that's on your staff is keeping that in the back of their mind.
Absolutely. We're acutely tuned. This is one of our most significant areas of revenue, and we are tuned into that greatly and are even, I have some conversations coming up with some of our attorneys that we work with from a collection perspective to just get a sense on, the market from that perspective and how they're dealing in that area post-pandemic. So this is one of the areas in particular that we keep our eye on quite a bit. And I'll say this in closing, in terms of addressing that collections and that delinquency question that you asked, is what we are afforded. So DCAD does evaluation, we assess the tax rate and what number we're going to apply, multiply times the tax rate, et cetera, to get to the total revenue that we want to bake our budget based on. That calculation that we perform also includes a certain estimate for what percentage we believe will be delinquent. That's also something that we can look at the market, have conversations with our attorneys that deal directly with some of the individuals who are having issues making those payments. And that may be an area where we can we can adjust the number that we put down for 2021's for the upcoming year's budget to adjust and take that into consideration. Okay.
Councilman, may I ask a question? Sherelle, of the delinquent property taxes, do we happen to know what percentage of those are commercial versus residential?
I do have a report that can tell me that. I didn't bring that information with me tonight, but I can share it after the meeting.
My suspicion was they were likely commercial that were still under protest.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Typically what we see is that because commercial properties have attorneys and accountants and, a whole team of people, that's where you typically see some of those things that tend to be under protest a little bit more than your residential properties, just because they have the personnel to be able to dispute and carry out those to court and things like that. So Thank you for that question. I'm going to push forward into the enterprise fund. So this slide does look like the one that you saw in your packet. Water and sewer revenue has exceeded our budget, and you may recall our budget, we maintained the same rate. We did not adjust our water and sewer rate for the year, and that is based on an increase of consumption. Same thing in performing for the stormwater charges. Those are all kind of, assessed in the same bill. In terms of the expenditures, our water and sewer operation is performing a little bit behind budget just because of the amount of water purchases and the contractual requirements that we have with Dallas Water and Utilities and TRA. So that has performed a little bit better than expectation. And lastly, I wanted to point out our stormwater utilities amount. So you'll see here $3.4 million budget compared to $1.5 million expenditure. Remember, in the budgeting process that we just concluded, we did two things related to stormwater. One, we set up a stormwater CIP fund to allow for certain long-lived projects to be able to be accounted for there. And the other thing that we did in this year's budget is we actually budgeted a deficit. We budgeted more expenditures than we did revenue. And that was because we fully anticipated that we weren't going to spend out everything in this particular year. So I just wanted to kind of bring that point home a little bit. Hotel motel is where the story is, where the pandemic story is. So what you see here is that our revenue in terms of the hotel motel taxes has not exceeded or performed according to budget. And you may want to remember that this is an adjusted budget. So this is like that budget that we go through, and after we see, oh, we're in a pandemic, what adjustments do we need to make? So this represents that adjusted budget. The adopted budget was $3.1 million to kind of give you a scope of, where we are with it. If there is a good thing about planning on getting $3.1 million and getting 1.9, the good thing is that a great majority of the expenditures within this area are fairly elastic. If we are not receiving as much from a hotel occupancy tax perspective, we're able to contract a great deal in terms of the incentives because they're driven based on individuals coming within our area. So this is one of the areas that we continue to watch and evaluate and work with our hotels as best we can to be able to have collections and to do what we can to incentivize and get them back to full functioning normals. But a lot of that is a function of where we are with the pandemic and people's willingness to travel. The last thing I wanted to point out is just our investment portfolio. As of the close of the year, we had a market value of $78.9 million compared to what we hold as a book value of $78.5 million, so about a $400,000 unrealized gain. We hold things to we hold things to maturity, so whether it's showing a gain or a loss, we're going to hold it and make sure that we reap everything that we had planned from a book value perspective. With that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you might have.
Any questions from council? Terry.
So in looking at our debt and all the various debt that we have, does it make sense to refinance anymore and take advantage of some of the lower rates that are out there?
Well, we actually just did a refinancing during this past fiscal year where we refinanced about $9 million worth of funding. We continually work with our financial advisors to see where we can get better rates. The one thing I wanted to share and caution is that similar to how when individuals refinance a home, there is a certain cost of doing that transaction. So you have to weigh kind of the cost benefit and what you're getting on interest rate compared to the closing costs that you might have with that home. If you can imagine, the closing cost on doing, these types of debt transactions is quite a bit more than what we might do with our own home. So yes, we continue to evaluate whether we can get better pricing, but we do that through the lens of what the cost benefit is compared to whatever the cost of closing and all of those types of things would be for us doing debt transactions.
Any other questions? Sherelle, thank you for your update. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a question.
I just asked you if you had a question. You said no.
Well, I changed my mind. I was thinking. Yes, I have a question as to the investment portfolio. I think you said we have about $400,000 profit or unrealized gain.
Unrealized
and that
gain.
We hold our debt obligations to maturity.
We hold our investment obligations until maturity.
Well, okay, but
Okay.
they're primarily debt, correct?
They are split throughout a variety of different types of municipal obligations, repo agreements, and agencies. So they're split amongst, we do that to kind of diversify our risk.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
But they're debt obligations primarily. Yes?
No, they're not debt obligations.
Well, they're debt instruments, I guess is the right word, sorry. But has the city ever, you said that we hold them to maturity. When we've had large gains, have we ever entertained or have we in the past ever taken those gains, taken the profits?
In the time that I've been with the city, we don't tend to do that. When you get into a situation, well, for one, that's not necessarily in compliance with our investment policy. So we set a policy so that we can, do what we can to not have this level of cash sitting in a bank account, so it's earning something for the city, but find the right balance between that and not exposing the city's funds to excessive amounts of risk.
Yes.
So when you get into, oh, this one has a gain, but this one wasn't, and I'm going to liquidate this one, you can really get yourself into a riskier situation than what our investment policy would tend to call for.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I've asked sort of a similar question in the past, and they're just not in the trading business to take advantage of that. The policy's set, and so it is what it is, and I understand that for a municipality, because you want that,
be
that
safe.
very low risk, and so, we might be leaving some money out there, but it's preserving our capital.
Yes, I understand that it's a conservative investment strategy, but just from my background, I'm thinking of, being able to take advantage of interest rate volatility, and markets move. They're not, and I think we'll have more movement next year too. So that was the reason for my question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans-Jones.
You are welcome.
Next is A5, discuss preservation of tree ordinances, a potential change to the comprehensive zoning ordinance.
Claude here? Okay. Good evening. Jennifer Paz, lead planner. Oh, I did not start at the beginning. All right. Thank you, Council. This ordinance, or this item before you today, is to consider a potential ordinance amendments to our comprehensive zoning ordinance. At the direction of our Planning and Zoning Commission, staff has been working with our commission diligently and for some time now in drafting an amendment to our landscape ordinance, which also includes a tree preservation ordinance. Today, I'm only going to be presenting the tree preservation portion of it, just to give you the ability to digest the information and ask questions pertaining specifically to the tree preservation ordinance. At a later date, I will be bringing before you the landscape amendment portion that's associated with this. Both were drafted together and in conjunction, and they'll play off of each other. But just for the time, just given the amount of information, we'll be just presenting the tree preservation portion today. So I want to start with the why, and I think many folks want to know why the city needs to update its landscaping and tree preservation requirements. While the genesis of this amendment came from the Planning and Zoning Commission, this amendment is in line with many of the city's goals in our many different areas. And I'm going to start with the city's strategic plan. There are three main critical business outcomes in the strategic plan from fiscal year 19 and 20 that this tree preservation ordinance and landscape ordinance would assist in realizing and also play well into. And that includes encouraging the redevelopment of our east side where we have many of our mature trees, and it is also a character of the east side. Preservation of trees and encouraging landscaping or requiring minimum landscaping also is a solution to improve our creeks, and also is part of our sustainability initiatives that the city wants to take on as a goal for the city. With that, I'll point out that tree preservation and landscaping assist in our stormwater management. It reduces runoff, reduces erosion, and also reduces pollutants by allowing water to filter through our soils, and having more landscape areas allows for that to happen. Also, our city's comprehensive plan goals outline several opportunities for preservation of tree and encouraging landscaping. Given that we're talking just about tree preservation today, I'll mention some of those. Our Central Area Plan identifies our existing trees in our neighborhood areas here in the Central Area as a main character of the Central Area, and it encourages preserving that character and preserving those existing trees. Also, as I mentioned, on the east side, along the street, you see many of our large mature trees that line the street, which has also become a character of that east side. And the east side plan encourages the preservation of those trees and enhancing those streetscapes. And lastly, I just want to point out that the city's slogan is a city in the park. And if we want to live up to that slogan, this is an opportunity that we can do that by amending our landscape ordinance and our tree preservation requirements. Some other points I want to make is that the Planning and Zoning Commission, their goals and objectives identified updating our landscaping requirements, including landscaping requirements for single family and non-residential, or residential and non-residential, excuse me. The commission identified that there is a discrepancy between new construction on the west side and new construction or infill, what we call infill development. In the central area where we have a lot of our existing neighborhoods, there's a difference in how we treat those properties when it comes to landscaping, what's required of those properties. I also want to point out that the commission identified that there, as properties are demoed and rebuilt here in the central area, there's a change in character due to the landscaping or lack of landscaping being installed in those properties. So that's another reason why the genesis of this ordinance. And lastly, I just want to point out the benefit of trees. I think we've all heard what those benefits are. They add to, they improve our air quality in our community. They add to the quality of life. And they also add some value. Sometimes it's difficult to put a number to that value, but as many of us have looked at, especially single family properties, there is some value added to seeing mature trees in a front yard versus seeing no trees or very small trees. So those are some benefits that having mature trees within our communities, within our community can add. So with that, I want to get into really the ordinance itself and what we have drafted. I've included in the packet a draft ordinance for you. I won't cover every single detail of that ordinance, but I'll stay a little high level. At the end, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those. But I want to start with what properties would be affected or potentially would be required to preserve trees. And in this ordinance, the way it's drafted is all properties would be subject to the tree preservation ordinance. However, we understand when we were drafting this ordinance that through the zoning ordinance, we've granted properties certain development rights through our setback requirements and just the development standards within a zoning ordinance. So we wanted to be very sensitive to that and not want to infringe on those development rights that we've already established. So this ordinance really focuses on preserving trees that are within the streetscape, those that are within along the streets or in front of a residential home or in front of a resident or a commercial property. So the tree preservation ordinance would not be applicable to any installation or maintenance of utilities, streets, alleys, sidewalks, or any other type of infrastructure that may be necessary. So if there's a tree that needs to be removed in order to install a water line, the tree preservation ordinance as it's drafted would not apply. Also, as it pertains to single family, any existing single family home or duplex structure that's already constructed, if they do a modification to the structure or an addition, the tree preservation ordinance would not apply. Any existing home that's not making any improvements but needs to remove a tree because it's causing damage or because it's creating a nuisance, leaves are constantly falling every season, the tree preservation ordinance would not apply. So just to put it in the other context, the only time this ordinance, the way it's drafted, it would apply is if there's an existing single family or duplex, and this is as it relates to single family and duplex, that the ordinance would apply is if the home is, or if the structure is completely raised, and a new structure or a new single family or duplex is proposed to be constructed, then that's when the tree preservation ordinance would apply as it's currently drafted. Other applicability points I want to make is that the ordinance wouldn't apply if there was a tree that needed to be removed because it was dead or diseased, or if the zoning ordinance itself requires buildings to be up to the property line or up to the street. If the zoning ordinance requires that, then this tree preservation ordinance would not apply since they're kind of work against each other. I'm a very visual person, so as I was putting this presentation together, I thought a good way to give an example or to help illustrate what this ordinance would require is to create an example. I did a single-family residential just since I think most of us would be interested on how it impacts a single family and the residents of the community if this ordinance were to be adopted. So here we have a single-family residential, we're going to say 1970 ranch-style home in the Central Area Farmers Branch. You can see that the property, the dark dashed outer lines is the property line, and then the inner gray lines are the required minimum setbacks. So you can see the existing home has several existing trees, 13 trees to be exact, different species, different sizes on the property. The property owner wants to build a new home, and they want to build a home that meets all of the zoning requirements, all the setback requirements, as you can see in the example on your screen. Well, in order to do that, it would require the removal of several trees. And so I'm going to go into the scenario with this ordinance. How would this ordinance affect this particular scenario? So, again, as I mentioned before, the intent of this ordinance was not to preserve every single tree on every single lot in Farmers Branch or every single property in Farmers Branch. It was really focused on the street space, what our public will see as you drive through neighborhoods and our commercial streets within the community. So do all trees on a property, or would they be required to be preserved with this draft ordinance? And the answer is no. Only trees that are within the tree preservation area. And so the tree preservation area is defined as generally the front yard or the front, up to the front setback of a home from the street curb to the front property line. So in this example that I illustrated here, you can see from the existing street curb to the minimum front setback, that area there is what would be known as the tree preservation area. In other zoning districts, such as light industrial and heavy industrial, where there's not an established front setback, we've established a 30-foot tree preservation area, and that's consistent with what is required in many light industrial districts. And then also, tree preservation area is defined as the area between the street curb and the property line. So it's this public space within here, and then any areas that are designated floodway or floodplain by FEMA. And again, that specifically is to encourage the preservation of our creeks, and also to address stormwater management, as we know that is a concern of the city. So in this example, only those trees within the tree preservation area would be subject to the tree preservation ordinance. And then I'm going to get into more specific as to size of trees and that sort of thing. But I'm going to illustrate in this example, only these 4 trees here would be subject to the tree preservation ordinance as it's currently drafted. Now, as I mentioned, there's more criteria in this ordinance. Do all sizes and species of tree have to be preserved? And the short answer is no. It depends on the species of tree, and it depends on the size and land use. And a lot of that is tied back to our state law. There are state laws and statutes that limit what cities can require when it comes to residential or single-family and duplex properties. So that played into how this ordinance was drafted, and I'll get into that in a moment. But first and foremost, I want to point out that with the guidance of our Parks and Recreation staff, we have outlined specific species of trees that are not required to be protected. So even if they're in that tree preservation area, they don't have to be protected just because these species of trees are known to be invasive, or they're non-native to the region. And so again, with the guidance of our Parks and Recreation team, who's knowledgeable on this, on species of trees for our area, this list here has been drafted, and those are trees that do not have to be preserved. Now, the property owner can choose to keep them if they so choose to, but it's not a requirement of the ordinance. Now, what is required to be protected? And again, as I mentioned, it depends on land use, and it depends on size and species of tree. So on the first one here, size in single family and duplex zoning districts, or any zoning district that allows for the use of single family and duplex. So for instance, on our west side, where we have several planned development districts, or here in the central area, this portion would be the portion that would apply. So as I mentioned, state law puts limits on what cities can do, and it states less than 10-inch calipers, cities cannot require those trees to be preserved. So the way the ordinance was drafted is any tree that's 10-inch caliper or larger within the tree preservation area, again, within that front yard, those are trees that have to be protected or considered protected trees. Now, when we drafted this, the Planning and Zoning Commission had concern on the number of trees. What if this property has 30 trees? Let's put just a scenario. We don't know what all cases are out there. So the commission recommended putting a cap for single family, and that is not requiring more than 18 caliper inches total, cumulative, be protected. So if a property has, let's say, 2 trees that are 10-inch caliper each, both trees are considered protected trees. However, only up to 18 are considered protected. And that'll make sense as I get into this more. Now, as it applies to other zoning districts, we set the protected tree size at 6 caliper inches or larger. So our commercial properties, light industrial, any tree that's within the tree preservation area that's 6 caliper inches or larger would be required to be preserved. Now let's go to our example here that I created. Here we have that single family home. We know these 4 trees are required to be there. These 4 trees are within the tree preservation area. Now these 3 trees on the left here are 5-inch crepe myrtle trees, and then we have on the right a 20-inch bur oak tree. Now, based on what we've outlined in the ordinance, only the 20-inch bur oak tree is considered protected and therefore required to be preserved or mitigated. And I'll get into the mitigation here momentarily. So in this case, what if this, they want to build this large home. We know now that they only have to protect that one bur oak tree. But let's say the property owner has plans for that specific property or just doesn't like bur oaks for whatever reason and wants to remove it. So would this tree preservation ordinance require that all protected trees be protected and not allow them to be removed or replaced? And the answer is it would allow for them to be removed or replaced. However, there would be mitigation that would have to be done in order to remove that tree. So the first option would be to plant a replacement tree. So for every caliper inch of tree that's removed, 1 caliper inch is replaced, and that would be replaced in that front yard. Again, since the focus is our streetscape, we want to plant those trees back within that streetscape. So anything in front of the home, the face of the home, or in front of the structure, between the street and the front face of the structure. Now, the commission had concerns with, how many trees are we going to require them to put in the front yard? It's going to become problematic with foundation, and it could become problematic long term. So at the direction, staff went back and evaluated that. And so for single family and duplex, the way the ordinance is drafted, that those 18 maximum caliper inches that have to be replaced, up to 18 caliper inches have to be either replanted on the property, and only half of those have to be within that front yard. The remainder can be put elsewhere on the property, or the owner can make an agreement with the city to plant all 18 caliper inches elsewhere within the city or within their neighborhood, as long as there's an agreement between the property owner and the city in order to do that. And again, the focus on that was just to not overwhelm a property with replanting several trees and ultimately create a bigger problem for the property owner. The second option is to pay a fee into our urban, what I've coined the Urban Reforestation Fund. And this fund, I'll get into what it would be used for, but for single family and duplex, it would be a fee per caliper inch. And for single family and duplex, it would be $200 per caliper inch, again, up to the 18 caliper inches required. And then for all other properties, 6 to 12 inches would be $100 per caliper inch, and then 12 or larger inches would be $200 per caliper inch. These fees, if you will, are based on our research on cost of purchasing a tree and the installation of a tree. If the city would use those funds in order to do that, or what it would be the equivalent of what it would cost the property owner or developer. So going back to our example here, this property owner has two options. They can remove this tree, this 20-inch bur oak, and either plant up to 18 caliper inches on their property, 9 within the front yard, and the remainder elsewhere on the property, or they can pay into the Urban Reforestation Fund up to those 18 caliper inches, and the maximum would be $3,600. So for those 18, even though the tree is 20, up to 18 inches. Or they can make an agreement with the city to plant trees elsewhere in the city or on another property. Now, to get into the Urban Reforestation Fund and what that is and how it would, how does it play into the preservation of trees? So this is a map of the city. The Urban Reforestation Fund is broken up into 3 tree zones. The funds, if this ordinance were to be approved, and if property owners were to remove trees and want to pay into the Urban Reforestation Fund, the monies collected would go into the respective tree zone wherever that property is located. So let's say the east side, there's a light industrial property, they're redeveloping it, and they want to remove a number of trees and want to pay into the fund. Well, the funds would then stay within the East Side Tree Zone Fund. And the monies would then be used to plant trees within our public street space, in our city parks, or other public open spaces. And the money that's collected within those tree zones would then be used within that same tree zone, to keeping the trees from the area that was impacted. And just to give some examples on how the city could use those funds, the Central Area Plan actually outlines opportunities for improving our existing residential streets and streets within our community by adding medians with landscaping and improving our streetscape with landscaping, specifically adding trees. So this top image is just an example from the Central Area Plan that outline that. And then the image on the bottom is an actual capital project that was done many years ago where the city improved the existing tree and added several trees in the median and also on either side of the street. So I covered the residential example, so I wanted just to quickly do a quick example of a non-residential building. So here we have a non-residential building. Let's just say it's Shopping Center A. This shopping center has several existing trees. The developer or the property owner wants to come in and redevelop the site. There's a higher and better use for it, and it's time to redevelop the site. So if this ordinance were to be approved, only the trees within that tree preservation area would be applicable. So here we have 5 trees within that tree preservation area. So again, depending on the size of the tree and the species of the tree, here we have several that are under 6 inches. Anything under 6 inches in non-residential is not required to be preserved. So only the 4 trees that are highlighted in yellow would be trees that would have to be preserved, or there's, as I mentioned, the mitigation options that they could use as well if they wanted to remove those trees in order to redevelop the site. Now, when we presented this, and we worked with the commission several times in several meetings, and one of the concerns that the commission brought up that we discussed at length was the enforceability of a tree preservation ordinance. And so staff, with the assistance of our community services team and director, came up with a plan that would help assist the enforceability of this ordinance if it were to be adopted. Excuse me, and that's through a tree removal permit and survey. So the tree removal permit would not necessarily be a permit itself. It would just be part of what we currently already do through our building permits, our demolition permits. It would just be another item that the applicant would have to address by providing a tree survey that shows all the trees within the tree preservation area on the site at the time that the property is proposed to be redeveloped, or if the site is proposed to be demolished. Now, zoning amendments is also another qualifying factor when the tree survey would be required. And again, the purpose of this is just more enforceability. If in the future we had concerns of was this tree required to be preserved or not, this permitting process would memorialize, if you will, what was existing at the time the redevelopment was proposed. And so why is the tree removal permit and survey necessary? I know there was concerns expressed from the commission on, is this another layer of paperwork or something else a developer or applicant has to provide? And just to point out that surveys are common, whether it's residential or non-residential. Those are, we get them when we purchase our home, and it usually will show any existing trees or all existing improvements. So if we want to ensure that this ordinance is enforceable, as I mentioned, this process will allow us to memorialize and take a tree inventory of trees that are on site. It also authorizes the removal of trees if those trees are required to be preserved, if the owner wants to remove those trees. And also, this process was a recommendation from our Director of Community Services to assist our code enforcement team. So if this ordinance were to be adopted, and in the future, if it becomes a problem, whether the tree had to be preserved or not, and if it was removed, then we can go back to these documentations to help our code enforcement officers with that. So with that, I'll close, there's not a public hearing, I'm sorry. I'll close my presentation and I'll open it up for questions. Our chairman from the Planning and Zoning Commission is also here if there are any questions of him and any of the deliberation that was had during the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings. Thank you for your time.
Questions?
I do.
I have a few, but I was going to let you guys go first. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure, I guess, how this originally came to be, because, and while I appreciate your presentation, just know that, our job is to look out for all sides of the community. And I'm not aware of any wholesale deforestation that's going on in residential areas of the city. So I tried to do my own homework on this. And this, to me, seems like another infringement or restriction on the rights of individual property owners. And I'm only going to talk about residential, because anything commercial has got to go through P&Z, and if a property is being redeveloped, then it's up to P&Z and your planning department to specify where trees are required and the numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So I found this to create a lot of questions. One, now does the city have to hire a certified arborist on staff to be able to address whether a tree is of the particular species that needs to be saved or protected, and or to what extent is it diseased? Because if somebody gets into a spat with the city and you're telling me that I have to save a tree and I'm telling you it's a diseased tree, then we've got a disconnect. So that presents a problem. The payment of the fee, in my mind, I believe it's excessive. I think the more appropriate thing for us to do is to say, on any new property or any redeveloped property, you have to have 2 trees in the front yard, or whatever we come up with. But specify that at the get-go. You've presented something that I believe is very restrictive, certainly costly, and again, I think that to me it seems like it's stepping on the rights of property owners. So I would ask the question, and this mainly applies to the central core of the city. Aren't we more concerned with redevelopment? I mean, we have a demo rebuild program, and we can require trees to be a part of the demo rebuild as you all are reviewing plans. But I went out and surveyed some other folks in regards to this, and here's where I think a big disconnect is. And as some of the older 1960 and 1970 homes are being replaced with new, more modern homes, and obviously people are eating up more of their property with structure, while it's important to try to preserve trees, we created a program that was trying to encourage people to redevelop and reinvest in the city. But yet, our costs to do that have increased almost 8-fold over the last 5 years. This, if a builder has to take down trees or whatnot, it's another tax to a builder. And when we're trying to encourage redevelopment in certain areas of the city, west of Josie, let's say, those lower value homes and the lower income folks that reside there, they're the ones that are going to be hurt the most by this program. I think we used to be known as one of the easiest places to work with from a city standpoint. Our permits and fees were very reasonable. They've gone up at least 250%, if not more, since I've been on council. So over the last 5 years. It used to be really easy to get a permit for a home to be rebuilt or built. And now it takes sometimes months to get that. And so, but now you've got the added cost of a tree inspection that's going to fall on homeowners. The Brookhaven area, which seems to be prime for redevelopment, is, I think we're going to see a slowdown because people are going to view this as another tax. Now, the one thing that did make me feel a little bit better was graphically seeing in your presentation, because I'm just like you, I'm very visual. So seeing those plots of where the structure is and the protected area. I think there needs to be, as we move forward in talking about this, I think there needs to be a big education area. Those things did not print in my packet, so, and I get my packet printed, so forgive me if I'm behind the time on some of this. But it's what are we trying to do? How can we go back to making it easy for people to redevelop some of these older properties without having the appearance of a money grab by another fee? That's what I worry about. And then we've tried to do things, and John, I'm going to pick on you because you've actually advocated in the past that you want less restriction on some things. And this happened to be one that I thought deserved less restriction. Unless we're really having problems in the city. That's the feedback I got from several of the folks that I talked to. I also talked to a couple of the builders to get their input. I'm going to wait on presenting that information till we take the next step, because perhaps as we move forward, we may hear other information from residents that cause us to maybe fine-tune this a little bit.
So if I may, just address some of your concerns or comments in regards to the draft. So I apologize, you're correct. In the presentation, it doesn't show all of the animations kind of to illustrate what I was trying to convey. The draft ordinance, however, is in the packet, and obviously that outlines in great detail the ordinance itself that's proposed. And in that ordinance, as I mentioned at the beginning, this was only half of what we've been working on. There's a landscaping ordinance that's also, we've also drafted and worked with the Planning and Zoning Commission with. And really the genesis, as I mentioned in the at the beginning of the presentation, was the commission had concerns on how landscaping is being treated, landscaping requirements is being treated for new construction, for our for properties that are being demoed and rebuilt here in our central area, and new construction, whether it's single family detached or attached on the west side. On the west side, the planned development districts have minimum required landscaping for residential properties, whether it's single family detached or attached. In the central area, that doesn't exist. We don't have a landscaping requirement. So what the commission expressed was we're seeing a lot of single-family homes being demolished, and we're seeing these large homes that, one, yes, they're increasing our tax base, and it's great for redevelopment efforts that we're doing. However, they're removing all of the landscaping and not required to install anything new. And so they're doing either very minimal, and it's not in line with the character that's already established in these neighborhoods. So that was the genesis, if you will, of this ordinance. And so to address that concern, that's how this tree preservation ordinance and the landscaping ordinance that obviously you guys have not had the opportunity to see yet came to be. And so it addresses some of that. Now, we're not seeing, rows of blocks, if you will, being demoed and rebuilt in our single-family residential neighborhoods. However, what the concern that came up was, as we're seeing more and more demo rebuilds, I don't want to necessarily say that they're through our demo rebuild program, but just demolition of existing single family and the reconstruction, we're slowly taking away from these neighborhood characters, and part of that is the existing landscaping and the mature trees really that are within these neighborhoods. And so just to address some of the concerns that you expressed.
Sure. And I appreciate that. And, I hate taking trees down as much as anybody. We're all about being green in Farmers Branch. But we couldn't even pass a stump ordinance. So we still have stumps in people's yards. Now, if somebody has an oak tree stump that's 4.5 feet tall, that's deader than a doornail, but is still a stump, is that protected?
Let's stay on the topic, Terry.
No. Is that protected because it's a protected tree?
So I'll address as far as your kind of tying back to your comment. You mentioned existing residential homes that it may be low-income families and being sensitive to that. When we were drafting this ordinance, staff wanted to be very sensitive to that, and that's why in the exemption section, we specifically wanted to exempt any existing residential homes or properties that where they're just wanting to remove trees because, either it's dead or it's just becoming problematic or it's impacting the structure itself. We wanted to allow for that opportunity. However, as I mentioned before, the concern was we're seeing these, less than $100,000 properties being demolished, and then you have 700,000 homes being constructed and very minimal landscaping. And so that was really the focus, is we're not seeing the quality in landscaping on these new construction that we're holding the properties on the west side to, or that other redevelopment properties in our central or east side that they're required to develop to. So.
Thanks. And I agree with most everything that Councilman Lynn said. I really, as I read through this, became rather negatively biased against this. I think I need to see if you buy a large caliper tree and you have it installed, you have to buy the piece, you have to rent the piece of equipment or have an arborist come out and dig it. And the tree itself, the cost is pretty high. And so I'm against, as Councilman Lynn said, I'm against putting more restrictions on people and the enjoyment of their property. I think we already do have in demo rebuild that you have to install 2 trees. I think that's already our
no.
I don't know. I've had people on Branch Crossing tell me that they had to have put in 2 trees when they did their demo rebuild.
So there are some properties that are planned development districts, that are zone plan development districts that have landscaping requirements. So I mentioned West Side. There are some in our central area, just south of Valley View, that have landscaping requirements. But that's just based on the zoning, not based on the demo rebuild program.
I hear you. I just also, I don't know. In the interest of time, I don't want to drag this out, but nothing here was addressed about the impact of power lines. I know it, and my particular house, I have power lines that would impact any property, any additional tree that you would plant in the tree area, the tree preservation area. So I think that a lot more discussion needs to come. If we're doing an overhaul of the landscape ordinance, I would say maybe we need to tee this up for our next joint P&Z meeting and really get into the nitty-gritty of it, because I think here we're trying to solve a problem that I'm not sure exists. I don't know how many large caliper trees have actually been removed because of a demo rebuild program, and maybe that's some number we should go out and get so that I can have it. Because if it's a big problem, then we need an ordinance to solve it. If it's a little problem, let's not go into here and start pushing costs off on residents. So that's just my opinion. I'm going to allow anybody else that wants to talk. I mean, let's keep our comments brief on this because there's going to be more discussion on it. But anybody else? Crystal.
Just in the interest of time, I do want to explore this more and really be able to have a conversation with our P&Z members. They may be have some information that may be able to give us more in regards to one over the other. Just would love to kind of hear from them too in regards to this discussion. So I think your proposal of having this be discussed during the joint and maybe after the landscaping plan too, because I would like to see how it all connects.
Right.
So maybe have us, whenever you all think it best, and so I'll defer to staff for the landscaping plan to get that information, and then have this be a joint meeting with P&Z, or add these two together so we can have a general discussion, because I think they're going to coincide consecutively. So, but just in the interest of time, I'll wait and just have more of a discussion on this, because I do think also just having the opportunity to get input from, some of maybe our own residents from our own districts to kind of gauge, especially those that have more of property within that central area. I would like to find time to gauge their concerns as well, if any. So thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I view it a little differently. I look at it's from residential, it's a new construction, and it's remodeling and redevelopment. And most of the trees on a property and my yard, I probably have 30 or 40 trees, and I think only 3 would be affected by, would be affected by the outline of this if we were going and removing trees for a remodel to do something. And I think it's an even playing field for new development and to maintain the character of the city. If somebody's coming out and they're doing a demo rebuild and they're building a $400,000 to $500,000 home, which is where most of them are falling in that range now, you don't want a $10,000 landscaping job. You want to encourage them on the front side to maintain the character of the home that they're building and to raise it. And I think that, I looked at it and I thought, as I read through it, I thought maybe we weren't addressing enough trees, because trees are being removed, dirt is being removed. Trees are on the dirt as we develop bigger and bigger spaces, and as this urban push on the east side, as we go and we get closer to the curbs, I just think if we're going to be, are we a city in a park, or are we just a city long term? And I think to maintain the character, I think maybe there's tweaking that needs to be done, but no developer has an advantage or a disadvantage over another developer in developing it. The costs are going to be flat, and I'm for the demo rebuild program, and but I also don't believe that the core of the demo rebuild program is Brookhaven, right? It's where most of it is, a lot of it is happening, but that's going to happen naturally. because of that community and the way it is and the amenities that are right there and the people that are attracted to those amenities. And our value versus values in Gulf communities and other cities were still extremely economical in regards to that. And I think as we talk about redevelopment in some of the lower income districts, you know, while there may be in the lower price housing, you know, we don't want those to be barren, right? We need trees on those properties. And anyway, I've spoken too long, but I have a different view.
Okay, fine. Mr. Driscoll.
Yes. I think there's a lot of different issues involved in this. I'm not prepared to say yay or nay. I think it warrants further study. And also, I'd like to hear about the other ordinance parts of what P&Z discussed. And one thing I just would add is that I know lots of folks that live in newer communities in other cities. They've often come here to Farmers Branch, and I've heard from them, they're amazed. They say, oh, well, we've got a brand new home, and I'm not going to name other suburbs. You know, we love it, da-da-da, but we don't have trees. And they come here and visit and, you know, spend time and visit folks and are quite impressed of the great, you know, abundance of trees that we do have here. And yeah, I just think it needs further study.
Thank you all. And I would say let's tee up, and I see David out here, so let's tee up a meeting on this and so we can really understand the thinking of the P&Z. I just don't want to just get in a situation. I think it's very expensive to take, say, a 10-inch caliber tree, to buy the tree, have it planted, and then get it established.
So I know most of your comments have focused on the residential aspect associated with this. So just real quick, from a high-level perspective, when it comes to commercial and multifamily development, then, is the thinking that tree preservation is still a viable option? I mean, based upon what Jennifer has presented here? Because right now, the challenge that we're in from a planning and development standpoint is we do not have any teeth in the ordinance to be able to help us with preserving any trees when it comes to commercial development. And so we're in a negotiation position with the development community. So I would ask you to give that some thought as we go to the joint meeting and have a further discussion about landscaping requirements and tree preservation. But that's also one of the reasons that was the genesis also for the proposed tree preservation ordinance, is so that the development community knows from the beginning what the expectation is and to remove us from a negotiation perspective. So, because as you know, staff can change, perspectives can change as to what a developer should be required to do. So I would ask you to give that some thought as well before we have our joint meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A6, discuss the Alpha Road Connector project. Who's going to present this, John? Who is going to present the Alpha Road?
Actually, I am.
Oh, you were, Tina, okay, thank you. This is one that we decided that we needed to put on the agenda just so it could be made public. It's just a small change to a project that the mayor, Councilman Lynn, and myself have been working on with the city of Addison and Brookhaven College, or Dallas College. And we just wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to see what was being done. So, Ms. Fergus.
Absolutely. So we have been in conversations with the town of Addison and Dallas College at Brookhaven campus regarding moving forward with the engineering design of the roadway and with the interest of promoting the roadway construction. So right now in the interlocal agreement that has been negotiated amongst all three entities, this is the exhibit that's included in that agreement. And so as it relates to the Alpha Road Connector, and in particular of interest this evening, is what's in the agreement is a minimum 105-foot wide right-of-way, and that it was a divided roadway. So basically two 12-foot lanes, one in either direction. And then in looking at the images from about 5 years ago when some of this discussion all started, the intention was to have more natural native landscaping, having more of an open ditch down the middle, center median. You would have some ditches and or partial ditches that are along either side of the roadway. But I think from the best that we can decipher and looking through past documentation, that the way this came about was more from an aesthetics design experience. So then start applying logic and maintenance and looking at it through that lens and from a construction aspect. So here recently, we've engaged in a conversation, and this is a result of actually our city proposing this idea to the town of Addison as well as Dallas College, is whether or not there would be support for redesigning that cross-section of the roadway. So instead of a divided roadway with 2 travel lanes, that we would have just an undivided roadway that accommodates a lane of traffic in either direction. There would be no center median. So the benefits of this, and as I said, this is more from through the maintenance perspective, is that from what we can tell initially when this concept was originally presented maybe 5 years ago, it was possibly perceived as being a private roadway first, so it was not looked through the perspective of the city of Farmers Branch having to maintain the section of roadway east of the roundabout. The roadway split with a depressed median or drainage ditch, if you will, does create some maintenance issues longer term, because from time to time that ditch in the middle, as well as the ditches on the outer side, they can fill up with silt and have to be have the silt excavated. You also have mowing that has to occur within that area as well. So it's by eliminating the depressed median in the cross-section here, then that removes that center ditch, and then you would only have potentially a portion of a ditch along the north side, and then maybe a partial ditch that's on the south side. From a pavement and maintenance standpoint, also, you reduce the number of edges of the roadway that have to be maintained. In this case, with this design, we're having to maintain 2 edges of the roadway, whereas under the previous design, you have 4 edges. You have the outer edge of the roadway as well as the interior edges, if you will. So apparently that provides for some maintenance challenges longer term, particularly from our Public Works Department. The one thing that this also provides for is improved access to the Encore substation. So Parish Episcopal School is about here, but there is a electrical substation, if you're not familiar with this area, back in this portion of the property just north of the college campus. And so by having the undivided roadway, the proposal is to provide for a drive connection that provides better access to the substation. What that does is it allows then for the larger equipment to be able to leave the site and be able to proceed eastbound. Under the other design scenario, the equipment would have to proceed west, go through the roundabout in order to be able to come back and proceed east, because this median opening would be fixed. We would not be able to do an additional median opening at that location. So it benefits being able to have Encore be able to get their larger equipment in and out of that site. So, and then lastly, with the roadway configuration, this provides for a more traditional median opening design. Your typical anytime you have a roadway that's intersecting with a neighboring street, your standard typical median opening configuration and design there. When you have the divided configuration, because those lanes become wider, it basically makes that median opening much wider itself. And so it requires some adjustments in terms of the design and how traffic maneuvers are accommodated in and out of there, as well as then also providing for an outbound left turn maneuver, if you will. Another benefit to this design is that it does provide a little bit of additional area for the proposed detention pond, which is shown here just south of the roadway. So in the City of Farmers Branch position, we feel that this is a more practical design from a long-term maintenance perspective. It may not be the most aesthetically pleasing option in terms of what was originally contemplated for the area, but then but as I mentioned, that center ditch itself potentially could have some maintenance issues, so it may not be as aesthetically pleasing longer term. But we are interested in receiving your feedback, because right now, as I mentioned earlier, in the interlocal agreement, the other roadway design configuration is required. We would have to, if this is something that we are interested in moving forward with, then we'll work with the attorneys to see whether or not the ILA has to be amended amongst all the parties, or whether or not there's sufficient enough wiggle room within the document. I can tell you the ILA does specify the minimum 105-foot right-of-way width, but we can continue working with the attorneys if this is something that we're interested in moving forward with. And John, did you have anything else to add?
The 105-foot width would be maintained because it's for the right-of-way, so that would not change. And we have checked with our legal.
Okay.
And the city manager has the authority to administratively amend the ILA with changes such as this. But we just wanted to make sure, there's been a lot of discussion leading up to this point, this was fully vetted in front of the council and our public.
Okay, I'll take comments, but I wanted to kind of summarize this, is that the roadway design was from an old document. This makes it easier for us to maintain once it's installed. It gives better access to the Encore area back there, and it has been requested by Dallas College. And so given all those factors, I would support moving to this design as opposed to forcing the older design. Now, there is also a benefit. It is less expensive for Addison to install the road. That being as it may, I think it provides benefits long-term for Farmers Branch. But if anybody feels differently, I'd like to hear those comments now. Terry.
So, John, I do agree with you. And because the road is less expensive to, or we believe it's going to be less expensive to install in this configuration, the only thing I would like to see is that it be lined on both sides, or at least, at the very least, on the north side with trees to provide some break for those, the Cambridge Crossing housing that lives over on the north side. Just provide some aesthetic break so they're just not looking at concrete. That's it.
Right, and the way the agreement is structured right now is we would have a mini park on that north side, and we're responsible for the landscaping design and installation of any improvements on the north side of that roadway. So we, the city of Farmers Branch, would have control over that design and what we put within there.
Good. Mike, you want to comment?
No, I'm fine with it. I think not planting trees on the south side helps us expand the detention pond.
Right.
Which is to our advantage long-term, so. Yeah, the land that this road is being built on, is it owned by the college?
The college, yes. So hence the three-way agreement. But the college would be willing to dedicate, I can't recall if it's street right-of-way or a street easement, but the agreement provides for that. It also lays out maintenance responsibilities, also enforcement from a traffic and speed enforcement, if you will, on the roadway. So, but this is all predominantly on the college's property, because the other benefit to the college is they get a new northern entrance into their campus that has otherwise not had that benefit from it in the past.
Yeah, I'm curious why we're picking up all the maintenance when it's on their property and it's something that they, they wanted.
I'll be honest with you, I was not part of the negotiations, so it's my understanding.
It was,
right, it will be dedicated as a public street, so that's why we've agreed to the maintenance aspect.
We maintain it from our city borders up to where it intersects with Addison, and then Addison then takes it up from there.
Okay.
It's Bella Road, I guess, is what it's called in Addison. Crystal, anything?
Sure, no, and I think I see them on there, but at the when I was looking at this, I was looking at the satellite map, and it shows the aligning of trees all alongside the south. So I'm assuming that all of those would stay.
There may be some that have to be removed, I mean, because taking into consideration the actual grading of the roadway and getting it constructed, but you can see many of the, and also, related to this is also there is a hike and bike trail network and additional sidewalks that are being constructed. So there will be some trees removed on this site. You can see some of the ones that, I guess it's the lighter shaded gray ones are the ones that are, they're working to preserve and maintain. The ones that are noted here darker are likely the ones that are going to be removed. And this is a great example of a drawing that shows a tree survey component associated with it. But also, in the middle of the proposed detention pond, there's this grouping of trees that looks like those will be removed.
Yep. Sounds good.
Ms. Driscoll?
Thank you.
In general, it makes sense to me. I would also like to see some tree coverage, at least on one side of it. And from the maintenance point of view that we would have to cover, I don't think this is going to, it shouldn't be a high cost, I wouldn't think. This is not going to be a very long road, I don't think.
Right. John? One more. Last comment.
Last comment here. I think The worst thing that's going to happen or come out of this road was a lesson that I learned on Saturday night. Northbound on Midway to turn west on Spring Valley. Could not do it because of Vitruvian lights. The traffic was backed up onto Midway, so nobody could turn left. So renavigating the area, cars traveling north on Midway could not turn Spring Valley. Cars going north on Marsh Lane were at a standstill between Valley View and Brookhaven Club. So this will be one more roadway that probably gets bottlenecked during the holiday season. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you all. Let's, A7 is discuss future agenda items. Christal. Mike.
Yes, I have several that I want to, I'd like us to consider bringing forward. One is, for the next election in May, I'd like to propose a non-binding resolution to get citizen support of trash cans. I think a non-binding resolution on the next election to get citizens to weigh citizen support on trash bins. There's been a lot of chatter on the neighborhood app about people wanting trash bins, and I know there's a vocal group that's against it, there's a vocal group that's for it, but the vocal group is a few hundred people, and we have quite a bit more than that. So I think that would be something I'd like to see.
Okay.
I'd also again, there was a lot of disinformation and everything around the library. It might be interesting to do a non-binding, survey at the same time on the library and consolidating it, because doing it piecemeal is going to cost us more, and over the long run, and it's going to create more havoc at the library for years to come, and it's just non-binding. I'll be off the council at that point in time, and it'll be for the new council to take up. But I think it's information that's important for us to know, not just the vocal sides of that argument. And then the third thing I'd like to see is, I'd like to see a discussion on multifamily and creating a policy or a strategy to provide some, I don't know what the right word is, rent control, or put some low in, for affordable apartments, and just have a discussion about that. Okay. And I think that is something that is timely for us.
Is that it? Yes. Okay, I'd like to have a discussion and potentially see a policy on remediation of graffiti. I ran into that this week, where it turns out that we don't really have a citywide policy and who's responsible for removing graffiti and how we can get consistent action on that. So, Terry, what do you got?
I've had a request by neighborhoods to investigate neighborhoods being able to put a garland or tinsel on streetlight poles. That's number one.
Okay.
Business signage and the suspension of the ordinance during the pandemic. That needs to be better communicated to business leaders or businesses in our city, number two. And then I think that the next meeting, we need to get some clarifications on the speaker requirements for addressing council during citizen comment. I'm hoping that the mayor will be prepared to address that in a little more detail. I've had a number of questions that I have not been able to answer.
Okay. Mr. Driscoll.
Yes, I have one item of interest. I'd like to learn about our cybersecurity of the city. and particularly in light of, the most recent developments here, but this is always an ongoing issue, something I'd like to learn a lot about, and I think we should have a discussion on that, because that affects the security and the operation of fire, police, the entire city.
Okay, thank
Can
you.
we do that in executive session?
Yes, we will. Thank you. That ends our study session. I'm going to read executive session, and we're going to adjourn upstairs. Item B1, council shall convene into a closed executive session pursuant to section 551.072 of the Texas Government Code to deliberate regarding, discuss the purchase, exchange, lease, or sale of real property located south of Valwood, east of B Street, west of Webb Chapel, north of Valley View Lane. So I will now adjourn study session, and we will move upstairs and hopefully have executive session during dinner. Thank you.